Good afternoon. Nice to have you here. So here we are on a hot day in Washington, D.C., which now also feels like the hot spot of the world. But it's cool in here. And like you, we're here. I feel it's important to be here today to talk about important things. So I've really been looking forward, and I'm trying to center myself in the day. I've really been looking forward to what will be a wonderful afternoon of conversation with Alison Saar and NIMWA librarian Elizabeth Ajunwa. Thank you so much for being with us today to do this. So let's all just take a deep breath and settle in a little bit. As we begin our program today with Alison and Elizabeth, I would like to recognize Denise Littlefield-Sobel and Gloria and Dan Logan, who have done so much to bring our Fresh Talk series to you, our public, for over 7+ years now. Thank you for being here, all of you, for our final Fresh Talk of this season, for supporting these programs, and as well as Dan and Gloria and Denise being the philanthropic bedrock of the National Museum of Women in the Arts. As you know, with recent rescissions of grants, including our own for a major project this fall from the NEH, et cetera, we can only say how very, very important that philanthropic tradition is in the United States and how much it's truly propping us up at this time. In that same vein, I also wish to acknowledge NIMWA supporters Patty and George White and Sue Henry and Carter Phillips. I also wish to acknowledge collector Stephen Scott, who is here with us and who first introduced us to Alison's work here at the National Museum of Women in the Arts some 25+ years ago. Thank you. For today's program with Arion Press, our sincere appreciation also goes out to Andra Minami, a new friend of NIMWA, who has facilitated and supported this new partnership along with Ted Gioia and Arion Press. And to Fred Levin, who along with his late wife Nancy have been devoted sponsors of NIMWA for a very, very long time. Both Amanda and Fred love when we, the people in the arts, collaborate. So I thank you for introducing us and bringing this program to fruition. Finally, a shout out to Kelly Daly, Gabby Chase, and the members of the NIMWA team who cross-departmentally collaborate to make these public programs possible. You all have made Fresh Talk and NIMWA Nights the talk of the town, and we so appreciate your efforts. Now, I am so pleased to have Ted Gioia come to the podium and say a few words about Arion Press and this project. Ted.
Thank you so much, Susan. That's a wonderful introduction and incredible comments. My name's Ted Gioia. I'm the Program and Development Director at Arion Press, which is a letterpress printer in San Francisco, which is the last printer in the United States to make books entirely by hand from comma to cover. So with a team of 8 full-time bookmakers and about 49 metric tons of metal type and equipment and some historic machines dating back over 100 years, we craft a very specific type of book. We make handmade artist books, and we only make 3 a year, each one limited to 250 copies. And the kind of books that we do are, even though we are operating in often a medieval tradition, we don't want to be the colonial Williamsburg of letterpress printing. We want to show why these crafts, why these arts, and why our craftspeople matter today, and why they are part of a beating, thriving heart of why the art of the book is essential to contemporary culture. And so we print editions of literary classics, inviting the country's leading artists to help us reimagine them. And we were so honored and blessed to work with Alison last year to produce an edition of Octavia Butler's classic, Kindred. Octavia Butler, we are also here celebrating on anniversary of her birthday. Who has has achieved her rightful place as one of the greats in the American canon. You may hear from the Huntington that her archives are the single most visited papers in the entire library and museum. And we were so honored to work with Alison to reinterpret this classic, and you're going to hear that story about how what we try to do is we can say that is a Arion, but we can say that is a cover by Megan Gibbous or a comma by Brian Ferret. And it's about bringing those traditions of people and crafts that are often invisible into an object that makes that tradition alive today. I want to say a couple of just thank yous as well. I should have started with that, but I was just so excited to start talking about Octavia Butler. I want to thank Amanda Minami for sponsoring this event and really putting an incredible amount of energy and inspiration into bringing this partnerships like this one, where we have the opportunity to work with incredible institutions like NIMWA and share our story on a broader cultural stage, are just so important and so incredible for the art of the book and our work. So thank you, Amanda. It is such a pleasure. And I also want to thank Fred Levin for sponsoring our reception and really helping us to create a space where we can talk about these books and use these books as an opportunity to talk about the issues that matter today and to meet people who have those kind of shared values and concerns. So thank you so much, Fred, as well. And without further ado, I want to introduce the story of Kindred. The story Kindred was published in 1979 and concerns African-American woman named Dana, who is transported by some odd, unexplained magic from 1970s Los Angeles to a plantation in Maryland in the 1840s. And this story was, and we're excited to have this talk to use our book as a way for how Alison's kind of incredible interpretation and stunning kind of rendering of this story, how we strived to bring Alison's vision down to each page of the Arion book. So without further ado, I want to introduce the artist, Alison Saar, and Elizabeth Ajunwa, the director of the Betty Boyd Dettre Library and Research Center.
Thank you, Ted and Susan and everyone. How exciting.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Susan and Ted, for those wonderful introductions. And I want to thank again Amanda Minami. I remember talking to her about Arion Press in the library, so this is so exciting that this is happening. Alison, it's good to be in conversation with you. I want to start off with why we're here today. When we were planning this event, you said that you wanted to do this on this particular day, and you wanted to do this on this day because it's, as we said earlier, it's Octavia Butler's birthday.
Happy birthday, Octavia!
Yes. So to start off our conversation, could you talk about Octavia Butler's significance to you as a person, but to you in your art form?
Yeah, well, I think, like probably many of the people in the audience, my first encounter with Octavia's work was Kindred, which was one of her earlier ones, and it was, just coming out of school, and, just blew my mind because it was like nothing I'd ever encountered before. I felt that there was so much synchronicity between her work and her ideas and the way I believed and my own beliefs, and then learning that she was fellow Pasadenean. She is interred maybe, like a few plots, I should say, from my aunts and my uncles and stuff like that. And so whenever we go visit them, we also go by and say hey. But just really incredible. And I had only met her briefly, but just always felt like there was this connection. And so when, I was just really thrilled to be able to connect, to collaborate with her, so to speak.
And we'll talk more about I want to hear more about that connection with her and other authors and artists. But I want to switch gears first to talk about your connection to Nimwa. We have quite a few of your prints in our collection, and also a sculpture in our collection. So I wanted to go through and highlight some of the works that are on view and some that are behind the scenes right now. So this work, if you've been to the third floor, you should have seen Scorch Song. So can you tell us a little bit about this work?
Yeah, no, so this is a sculpture that's kind of, I really intrigued with skillets, and you'll see that imagery comes up twice actually in upstairs or downstairs, wherever we are. But this notion of, these powerful women, and that many of us, our connections with our mothers and our grandmothers come through cooking. And it's not just about making the food, it's really about community and being in the kitchen and all the things that happen in the kitchen. Like, for some of us, our hair would be done in the kitchen, and that was the space where all the women kind of gathered, and that it was just a really sacred space. And I love that boys were invited into that space as well. And I think that's where a lot of young men learn their humanity through this these conversations between these women who have respect and love for each other. So that's where I really started grasping on this idea of the skillet as sort of a source of power as well as nutrition. And so she's wearing this girdle, and it's kind of looking like at the mythology of the Queen of the Amazons, who had a girdle that was her power source, and kind of really thinking of things that we wear upon our hips, because our hips are also a power source, and how, that these are things that can really change people's lives and add to people's lives. So.
Yeah, and I think it's such a great connection to Kindred as well, because there's a lot of scenes in the kitchen, and it's an important space in the book as well. So I thought it was a great connection. I want to ask you about the girdle, because my interpretation is also the weight that especially Black women have to carry in this world. And every time I see that work, I think about that. Did you ever think about that aspect of it, or was it more just your family
it's funny,
stories?
This is a smaller version of when that's life scale, and the actual belt is really, really heavy. And and you have to lift this thing up and cinch it around her waist, and really understand that, that responsibility towards a family is a physical weight, and some of it is burden, but it is also a blessing. And so I think that's really skillets are just so cool because they're so heavy.
So if you haven't, please go and check out this work on the third floor of the museum. Next we have Mirror Mirror. Can you tell us about this work?
Yeah, so again, hence the skillet. And I kind of see this as the closest thing I have to a self-portrait. And I think, identifying as Black, but presenting as white, it was just a chance for me to really talk about how, I was experiencing growing up. And so, when I was with my family, my mother's family, that was always just who we were, and it was never questioned. But, when I was in other places, in schools and stuff like that, I was always kind of seen as an outsider, as an other. And so this is just sort of my journey of just trying to connect with that inner self. I think for so many women in my mother's generation and my grandmother's generation, my grandmother was biracial as well and very fair, and that, they would see that as an opportunity to pass. And many people look down on that, but it was also a means of survival. And so there's so many routes we go to survive, and to be there for the next day, which brings us to the Kindred. Yeah. Full circle back to Kindred.
It is. I wanted to highlight what's in our collection, but then it turned out that they relate so much to the work and this consistent story of what women have to do to survive, what Black women have to do to survive, and what you have to do to maintain the familial structures, even if it's hurting you. So,
Right.
yeah, so, wonderful. This is resting right now, but I wanted to, yeah, it's resting right now, so you can't see it, but I was hoping you could speak about this one because there's some similar imagery in Kindred as well, so if you could speak about this.
Well, this particular print was made for what was to be the Women's Museum of the West. Is that what it was called? The West, something like that, which unfortunately we don't have a West Coast version of this. We have to come all the way to see women's art on this side of the coast. But, you know, I was really interested in sort of the history of Black women during the gold rush and how they were often the wealthiest women because all the guys looking for gold weren't making any money. But because these women were laundresses and because they were cooking for these people, they were actually making a lot of money, and it was really beautiful because they were able, I feel like I have my back to you all, I'm sorry. They were able to take that money, and many of them were able to buy their family's freedom. And so it's just a really powerful story. So it's funny because I've gotten, people look at this and they're like, well, why are we showing images of Black women doing laundry? I think there's another version in Sacramento where she's wearing piles of laundry upon her head, and I'm just like, well, you know, whose shoulder are you standing on? You know, who was down on the ground scrubbing floors so you could go to college, or your grandmother could go, or your great grandmother could go. So, you know, it's also kind of, you know, singing, telling the stories of those who, you know, don't have anyone telling those stories for them, and how we all are really indebted to these women that did that.
I want to move on from there because we've just looked at a sculpture and some of your prints. And one of the things we talked about was your feelings on the power of the printed image. And you've done book arts. We'll talk about one today. But you've also done broadsides. So could you talk about broadsides in this collaboration?
Yeah, well, this was another wonderful opportunity that we worked with the press, and Evie Shockley, who's a poet who teaches at Rutgers and is a dear friend. And yeah, we met kind of in a curious situation. I went to go hear her talk in at Vermont Studio Center, and I'm sitting in the audience, and she's reading this fastic poem that was actually about one of my pieces. And so it was like, I gotta meet this girl. And so it was just an instant friendship, and she was working on works about Topsy, and I'd been working on some prints and images and paintings about Topsy. So we, you know, since then collaborated on a number of things, and it was literally, we were in the cab coming into the press to kind of talk about, you know, we got together to have a conversation and all that, but, you know, we were saying, well, we need to do something together. And we were talking, well, of course, it was when Roe versus Wade was first being at the beginning of the dismantling, of which we're seeing so much of it now. And we're like, it was just like, what can we do that can kind of, you know, address this and bring this, you know, in another way that could be, well, anyway, so we did this print in connection with Brigitte, which is based in New York. Is it based in New York? Brigitte Elias, yeah. And so what they do are, these are women, or it's an organization that helps women, you know, somehow manage all of the difficulties of trying to get an abortion if you live in a state where abortion is illegal. And so they help with transportation, they help find people, you know, to give them a place to stay, and all those fine things. You know, they're not actually providing the medical care, but that all those things that we understand are really essential to make this thing be a possibility for these women that have no options in their own home state. So it was really wonderful that, you know, by selling these prints, we were able to raise funds to help them, and also just bring the organization into light. So many people aren't aware of them, but yeah.
The museum has a collection of, we're building up our collection of broadsides, and we've just added this to our collection, so we're really excited about that. And we also have a pretty well-known collection of artist books. So I wanted to talk about, I know you did this, I think this one was with Harriet Jacobs. this, or there's a little bit of
Yeah,
her work in this
so
one?
what Evie did was she took excerpts from Harriet Jacobs' story and then wrote her own in there, and yeah, so it's kind of a combination, a collaboration.
Like a triple collaboration.
Yes, exactly.
And then you also did this artist book with Evie Shockley.
Right.
So can you talk about this one and your work with artist books and how this came to be?
Yeah, this was actually printed with the Experimental Printmaking Workshop, which is at Lafayette College. Was begun by Curly Holton. And so, I wanted to do something that was an object as a sculptor, and I like this idea of kind of having a box where these things existed within. So there are 3 poems. They all fold up and go inside of this box, but you can also hang the box onto the wall and have the poem kind of spill out of her mouth. And then, so this is what it looks like when it's not assembled. And then these other 2 are 2 separate poems. And then the ones that are laying on laying flat are excerpts from each of the poems, and they're printed on water-soluble paper with water-soluble ink or soy ink. And so they are meant as, it's kind of like emergency ofrendos or emergency offerings. So people are encouraged, if they find themselves in a situation where they may need a mami wata to help, or the spirits, water spirits, to come to assistance, that you can actually put the print in a river or a lake or a pond or even your bathtub. And it's beautiful because it turns into words, and then the words turn into this alphabet, and then the alphabet turns into nothing. And so it gets consumed by the water.
See, that's why I put it in the slide, I just had to talk about that one, and I'm hoping we get this in our collection as well, because
There's a few of them kicking around.
so we'll have to add that too. So from there, let's talk about what we all came to discuss, which is Kindred. You put so much intentionality and thought behind every aspect of this work. So I want to kind of just talk about the different aspects. Even down to the cover, I heard you had thoughts about that. So can you tell us a little bit about, your thought process in creating this? And then I have another question for you. Yeah.
Okay, one at a time. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I read this book, really young, just coming out of school, and so, it was really interesting and kind of odd that I hadn't revisited it since. So it was really interesting to read it back, no longer, in my 20s, and, now in my 60s, and a mother, and all that stuff, and kind of have that other contextual layer on top of it. But I was really loved that there's so much actual texture to her writing. And as a sculptor, I felt that was something, again, that I could really kind of understand. And so, I just made a bunch of blocks, and, some of them are kind of pictorial, that are kind of looking at the chapters, but also some of them were just really wanting to kind of create, a surface, so that you could feel the book as well as you could read the book, and that, it's so beautiful that it's, so these were just blind blocks of wood that I carved, and so they're embossed, and that's for one of the covers, this one here, and and then that, if we go back, that's so it's deer skin, is that the story? Yeah. So, and there was some really interesting story. I'm sorry, I keep asking Ted.
We didn't remove the bullet holes.
Right.
For where the deer was killed.
So some of them. Right. But they're just really beautiful. And then, of course, working with the incredible staff. So I wish I could take full credit for the beautiful design of these books, but working with Brian, who's their designer and kind of overlooks the whole thing, and so we met and we just had a conversation about what this was going to be made out of and all these things, and so and he had suggestions. There's classical materials that bookbinders work with, and because they're durable and because they're affordable and all these other things, And so it was a real education for me. I mean, I had worked in printmaking and done other broadsides, but had never really thought about that larger thing. And I think I had made some artist books way back when, which are just like weird sewn things that I made out of tar paper. And it's beautiful to see the space upstairs that's dedicated to artist books, to see how varied all of these things can be, and really wonderful. But yeah, so it was just really exciting to kind of collaborate in that respect and be exposed and shown all the different ways things could go.
Can you talk about the type that and why it was chosen? I know that you had conversations about that.
Yeah, well, actually, this was again brought to me by Martin, and it was this the typeface is called Martin because it was the typeface that was used during one of the marches, and so it's lovely that it's kind of this era in between my interpretation and Octavia's, but it's lovely to kind of place these things in there and sort of bring that the civil rights movement into it as well, in a very delicate way.
And I think with the cover you had denim, like thinking of what she might have come across or the texture she would have come across in the story.
Yeah, this sort of like faded indigo, which would have been like and linen or denim, which would have been fabrics that would have been available at the time, and that would have been worn mostly by men and women that were enslaved because they were cheaper materials, and the notion that indigo was also just this plant-based thing that has this kind of beautiful color, and then it fades out there. So we were thinking about kind of what materials existed then, and her bag that she would carry, and what that bag may have been made out of, and all of those things. And so, again, it was just kind of pulling from these funny little, notes within the text that could kind of guide us to a real textural way of expressing that. Yeah.
So I'd like to ask, when was this presented to you? Because you've been booked and busy. You've had, you did the public art. You were commissioned to do that for the 2024 Olympics. You right now have an exhibition up in Paris, France, at the Galerie Le Long.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I said it right. And yeah, so I know you've just had a bunch of projects. So how did this fit into your busy schedule?
Yeah, the way things fit in my schedule is whoever knocks on my door first and gets the contact to me first. But this was something I just really felt passionate about. It was a new experience for me, and it was nice because it was something I could work on at home. So I came up and visited the press, and I got to see, and I recommend if anyone is in the Bay Area to go visit. They're in a new home, which I have not yet visited, but to just see how there's a foundry, they're, melting the lead to make the type. And it's just really amazing and fascinating to see all of these, just all the different stages that you go through. And so, and also just to see all the incredible books that they've done historically. It's an amazing collection. So I was just really excited, and I loved the idea of, just a really hands-on, handcrafted object. It's kind of hard to even call it a book because it goes beyond that in so many ways. And so I was, I just read the book again and started making notes. And it a pattern sort of evolved, much like the pattern in Kindred itself, where each chapter opens with Dana's ancestor's life being endangered, and then closes with Dana's life being endangered. And so each chapter is framed by violence. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't, I got halfway through the book and I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be really, really dark. And it's a painful book, but I think that that one kind of line consistency in it is that she understands it's her responsibility to all of her ancestors that came before her to keep this child alive, and even as a man, and so it's again this story about how we owe this debt to our ancestors, past and present, sort of thing. And so, despite all that violence, it was all kind of carried through this act of love.
Yeah. I'd love to look at some of the scenes that you've captured so beautifully. Can you tell us about this image here?
Yeah, it's funny. Actually, I brought the block, and I realized on the block that she actually has a face that I never carved because I carved it, and then when I did the first proof of it, I'm like, oh, she doesn't even need a face. And that also because he's this kind of shadow, but I also wanted to kind of depict Dana as sort of an Elegua figure who is kind of a messenger between the two worlds. And so here she is with the crossroads behind her and kind of playing off of traditional Haitian Veves designs. But yeah, so she's kind of this sort of shadowy figure and a mask figure as well.
And this one?
Yeah, so I think this is where this is her first encounter. And so and it's curious because I think some of the images in here are kind of referencing other images that I've done. And so it was kind of a way that I felt that I could make the work and still have it, even though it's Octavia's story, it could still be my art as well. And I think that was really a strange, tenuous space to try to fill those two gaps and bring those things together. So this was, I had done actually a lot of images of people drowning after Katrina and looking at the Great Mississippi Flood of 1927. And so this image kind of harkens back to something along those lines too.
Yeah. This image, the fire.
Yeah, so of course she gets called back because Rufus has set the house on fire. He set the curtains on fire, just being a boy and being bad. And so kind of how I've shown her here is kind of where she's materializing. I think of kind of like Star Trek, beam me up, Scotty sort of thing, where she suddenly just materializes in this space. So he's not even aware that she's there yet, and she's just kind of like appearing and arriving, so to speak. So she's like, put that fire out.
And for those who don't know the story, she's being called back to save the ancestor that is a slave owner and sort of owned her ancestors. So she's having to protect him. So
and I think following, if you think of like Twain, where these children in very racist environments are sometimes these curious innocents, and it's interesting to see how he evolves into all the other hateful people of those periods and times. But at a moment, he's kind of like confused and perplexed by who she is and why she keeps appearing. But how can she speak properly, and how can she, why is she dressed so funny and all that stuff? Because there's that, and it's kind of like a puckish. I mean, it's an old sort of tool to kind of really talk about innocence and understanding, the horrors of the world through a child's eyes, sort of thing. And so
yeah, and Octavia Butler was a science fiction writer, and so it's historical, but it's that science fiction that kind of that story of going back in time and what would you do to someone who's hurt you, but with a twist, right?
Get even.
Yeah. And what do you do if you can't get even?
Right.
So,
yeah.
The beating. Can you tell us about this image?
Yeah, it makes me sad just to see these images, but and to try to keep it super simple. I wanted to have, all the images are black and white except for the one which is just red in the front piece because of the paper, and then there's one other one that has red in it. But to just have them be super simple and super graphic, but really kind of talk about it and sort of, it had that expression of anguish just in her hands. We just yesterday we had seen the Catlit show, and you look at all of those amazing prints and looking the horrors in some of those images and what a master she was. And I think I owe a great debt to Elizabeth Catlit for her work, and how those pieces are just so simple. They're just black and white or whatever, and just so super expressive. So
yeah, because this scene in the book is very descriptive, and so I thought it was interesting that you chose to not show all of that, but you still feel the pain.
Yeah, I was trying.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard.
Yeah. in the bath.
And so this is,
yeah.
yeah, so, when she gets back from being beaten, then, she knows that if she, takes a bath with salt in the water, that it'll heal her wounds somewhat. But, knowing that she is only in this space momentarily, and this is a moment's rest and peace, but, meanwhile, she's alone, and she's knows that she's going to be called back next time that fool gets into trouble again. So, yeah, just I wanted to show despair, I guess, in this image. Yeah, and we kind of we'll go back to it, but I kind of created these kind of tile rooms, and which is also, I don't know if many of you were aware of the Altadena fires and the Pasadena fires, but a lot of those bathrooms had beautiful, like Batchelder tiles, which were these beautiful. So I really wanted to kind of also touch a little bit into sort of Pasadena's historic architecture in that as well.
The Escape. Can you talk about this one? We also have a print of this as well.
Right. Yeah. So for the deluxe edition, we created like the actual full-scale print of it. So I should say, technique-wise, I made them one scale, which is almost the size of the book, but we then reduced them to kind of fit into the space. So the blocks are actually larger than which also gives me an opportunity to have more detail. But this one, and it's curious because I did take artistic license in some of them, because I don't think she's actually running through cotton. I don't think cotton's on the plantation whatsoever. It's sugar cane and other and tobacco or whatnot. But I just love this idea of kind of like, the stars being reflected in the fields of cotton. If you see images of cotton being grown at night, there's just like these glowing things out there. So took that advantage of being able to mess with the text a little bit. My apologies,
it's a reimagining.
Ms. Butler.
The dog. I love this one. It's just so scary.
Yeah, it is scary. Yeah, and at one point, she was being attacked by a dog because they were looking for her, and so she's trying to fight him off. And I don't know what to say. It was supposed to be scary. She held her own.
The cornfield.
Yeah, so in this one, I do kind of show some evidence of having beaten, lashed, but she's also kind of holding the machete, and in some ways it kind of makes me think of like Nat Turner, and kind of wielding a weapon, a weapon of the tool as a weapon, sort of thing, which takes us back to skillets.
Yeah, and also just framing where it is in the story. If you've read the novel, she's starting to make a plan for resistance and the end of this journey. So, yeah. In the attic.
Yeah, and this is where she just realizes, the only way to get home and to get out of this thing, because it's getting increasing as he gets older and older, he becomes more increasingly dangerous, and starts showing a sexual interest in her as well. And so, she gets, and then she also realizes that, initially when she saw a snake, she was able to come back, and so all these, for her to convince herself that her life is in danger, it had to get more and more drastic and darker and more threatening. And so, at this point, she tries to cut her own wrist to convince herself she is going to kill herself, to die, to escape. So it's just like,
So I'd love for you to talk about this. There's two images and this overlay here and the significance of how that is in the book.
Right. So we use this beautiful, is it Japanese or is it Korean? A Japanese, and it's chiri, or a type of chiri? Some sort of paper that has a lot of, it's a rice or mulberry paper that has a lot of fragments in it. But what's really incredible about it is that it's translucent. And I love it because it feels kind of like a skin that, that it has this sort of, or it feels like a veil in a weird sort of way. So every time you come upon the image, you're seeing it in the reverse, and you're seeing it from the backside. And it's kind of, again, kind of makes me feel like you are seeing through Dana's eyes, that you are coming into this scene, you know, through this time warp, this veil of time, and so yeah, and that was another one where actually in the book she describes the shoes that she's wearing when she's has hung herself in the barn. Not Dana, but another character who couldn't take it, just finally despaired and ended her own life. But I gave her bare feet, so.
So here's images again. And then
Yes,
finally,
our centerfold.
yeah. And then finally, this image that is the beginning and the end of the book. Can you talk about this one?
Right. So yeah. So the way the book opens, she's in a hospital, and it's like all this confusion, and she realizes that she is missing one of her arms, and you don't understand why or how that's happening until you get to the very end of the book. And so I wanted to open the book. We kind of recreated a block with the tile, sort of looking at kind of traditional bookbinding pattern sort of things. And so when you first open the book, you just see this arm, and you're like, well, what's going on? And it's not until you get to the end of the book and you understand how she lost this in her last trip coming back, that a piece of her had to remain behind. And so unfortunately, part of the thing about printmaking is everything is flipped, and so I got the wrong arm cut off. But oh, brother, it wasn't even until I actually looked at the book, I'm like, oh my God. And I was like, wait a minute, which arm is that?
Again, it's a reimagining. So all of we have on display after the talk of the book, some of the broadsides and some of Alison's work that you can see. But I want to switch gears a little bit and talk more about your collaborations with artists and authors. You've talked about Evie Shockley and some other artists that you've worked in. Can you talk about the importance of collaboration or how that has manifested in your art practice?
Yeah, and I think, as an artist, and maybe it's only been maybe the last 10 years where was in the position to hire assistants and things like that. But, before then, it's a very solitary existence, and I know for writers as well, if not even more so. And so it was really interesting, and I think what's really wonderful about printmaking process in general is that you're working with masters that really understand their craft and that they are bringing things to you. And so just as I was being, shown different materials and different possibilities and, things, well, there's a this or that, it has some really amazing name that I didn't know what it was. So I learned a lot in this process. But yeah, so it's just an opportunity to really expand. And I think, working with poets, it's been really wonderful because it is always just a sort of a meeting of two ideas and two minds in a place that, Evie sometimes is thinking about one thing. And so when actually, for example, when we was doing the book with Evie, I said, I'm thinking about this book about Mamiwata and water spirits and Yemaya. And she said, oh, I could work with that. So she just went off and wrote her stuff, and I went off and made my images. And then when we got together, like, oh yeah, this kind of works. So it was just really exciting that none of us were necessarily dictating to the other what we were expecting of them. And I think that's just a really important way to kind of enter that artistic practice, to allow each contributor their own freedom to imagine things in their own way without feeling like you're constantly having to tell someone else's story, which I don't think is quite so successful.
One thing we're looking forward to here at the museum is in 2027, we'll have our Women to Watch exhibition, and that'll be focused all around artist books and book arts.
Fantastic.
And I know you're working with Tia Blassingame, who was going to be the guest curator for that exhibition.
Oh, great. Yeah, Tia is
so,
wonderful. Tia and I are working on a project, a print. It's not a broadside, but a print to raise funds for the Black families of Altadena that have lost their homes and businesses. So. Yeah, so when they come out, you all gotta buy them and put money in those people's pockets. So.
And then finally, to wrap up this conversation, I want to ask you, this work is kind of a collaboration with an author who's no longer with us, and I wonder if going into creating this, you thought at all about what Octavia would have thought about the works in your depictions.
It's really scary,
Yeah.
you know, because, you know, I believe she is still here. And, you know, I mean, that book didn't come out of nowhere. She's been through things and around things and continues to cycle around. I believe that her spirit is still visiting us. And so it felt like a huge responsibility. And not that you know, there's many versions of her books out there, and, you know, will continue to be many interpretations, but I really wanted it to, one, feel like something that was true to her ideas and her thoughts. So it was a little frightening, but I think what gave me courage to proceed with it was knowing that this was going to be a really incredible, powerful, special object, thanks to the skills of everyone at the press, and that, that it really was, you know, in some ways a gift to her.
Well, I think that's a beautiful way to end the conversation, and I want to thank you so much for the time. I think we can open it up to a few questions.
Yeah, folks. I can turn my
if
chair.
anyone has
so I'm
questions
not-
for Alison.
I'm sorry. Anybody have questions? Got someone back there?
Hello, I'm a printmaker and book artist. My name is Sarah Matthews. A question for you as a printer nerd. What carving tools are your favorite?
Now, I don't know the names of them, but they're mostly Japanese, just really fine. You know, originally I worked only with wood, but for these we did linoleum cuts, and it was actually, it always feels like linoleum is cheating, and so when I went to see the Catlett show and saw that they were all linoleum, I'm like, off the hook, because there are so many problems with doing it with wood. But, you know, I started it, my father had given me some tools to carve, and because I was carving wood, it just was sort of a natural sort of way to make prints. So, yeah. Thanks.
There's a question up here.
We're just waving.
We just know each other. I wanted to ask, as someone who is involved now in the sort of current moment of not a resurgence, but maybe a boom in artist bookmaking and in zine making and in independent print work and independent publishing amongst young people right now, just if you had any thoughts or anything to share about, I heard you're thinking about this not really being a book and more of an object, but the importance of that distinction between book and object, and what maybe you prefer about being able to make objects that you are able to share. I know that that's really at the crux of a lot of our thinking right now in establishing permanence for the stories of young Black women, and why we maybe prefer to make objects rather than other forms of art. Yeah, any thoughts that you might have had there, the difference between the book and the object, and maybe any preferences that you have between the two?
Yeah, and I guess because, you know, we did have the opportunity to explore materials that were tactile, and, you know, again, you know, I think part of what we were thinking about, why we started with the beginning of the story and the end of the story, that all of this becomes physical time in a weird sort of way. So, you know, it just, and I know that this isn't necessarily a possibility. I mean, if you saw how much work actually goes into these things, it's really, really incredible. You know, some of them are hand-bound and all of that stuff. But I love also that, like you said, these younger generations are doing zines and stuff like that. But I know even like my mother's generation, she was doing, when the Xerox machine came out, and all these women artists were making, you know, Xeroxes, and then she was also part of the women's building in Los Angeles, and actually, you know, some of the broadsides that I printed with other poets were printed on women's building presses. They've moved on to other places, which is also beautiful that these machines kind of like many of the machines are at Arion have their own specific history, and that they're kind of being carried on these other histories. Yeah, I just think it's really incredible that there's so much exploration now, and that each generation it becomes different materials. I mean, now they're dealing with computers or risographs. Is that that had a real big boon, right? They're like, what are these weird little things that you can make? And so there were a lot of young artists that were and my children included, were really interested and had made little books that way as well. But the idea that you could just and the idea, I think, that they're made and many times they're shared and exchanged too, which I think is really beautiful, that there's sort of this kind of expansive community of gifting things to each other, which is really nice, yeah. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I want to thank you so much, Alison, for not only the immaculate and bodacious bodies of work that continues not only to inspire me, but also the generations after me. My heart is full, and it's filled with so much gratitude.
Thank you.
And I have a two-part question, but they're kind of unrelated, but they are related.
All right, we'll take them
I
one
talk
at
like
a time.
jazz. Okay, thank you. No, I shouldn't, because I don't want to be greedy. But the first question that I have is that you've read Kindred now, I guess, more than twice. And the first time you espoused that you read it was when you read it in your early 20s. So how was your experience reading it from your early 20s, and how is it reading it now as a silver siren that you are now to create this work? And then the second question I have is one of the key components in the work that you create is spirituality, and I feel like the theme and motif that's very eminent and pervasive in all of the work that Octavia Butler creates is spirituality. Mm-hmm. Now I'm gonna kind of get a little woo-woo. Were you in? And I'm not saying woo as a pejorative. I live there. But the question that I have is, were you in conversation with the spirit of Octavia to create this object that is forever immortalized, that is going to be in existence beyond all of our physical beings here? So yeah.
Okay, well, starting with the first one, I think, like many books that we read when we're fresh out of college or in our 20s, it has a certain impact, and I think, it was horrifying and scary, but also sort of exciting and mysterious and sort of not. And I think, so then coming back and reading it, having, had children and having had grandparents that had passed and all these things, that it just felt like a deepened experience with it. And not to say that can't be experienced when you're 20. There are many 20-year-olds out there that are like, born wise. So that wasn't necessarily me, but I loved, that. And I think anytime you read a text 2 to 3 times, that each time you glean something else out of it. So it just felt that much mature. And it was that, I think, one of the things we were talking about was why Kindred, and especially now that Parable of the Sower is getting so much attention. And, and that she, this is maybe the least, and she, I don't think, ever really considered her a science fiction writer, right? But because short of understanding it as anything else, magic realism maybe more so, or something like that, but it wasn't something that she claimed herself. But the other works, that we're dealing with, more sort of, intergalactics, or with, in terms of Earthseed and things like that. And now I've lost my focus.
Why you chose Kindred over?
Oh, right. Because I chose it because, I think so much of my work is kind of looking at the presence through the past. And, people are like, well, why are we still exploring imageries of the enslaved? And we, of course, know that past is not past, which is ever present, even more now, from what we're hearing in the news every day. But, that, these are stories that cannot be left behind, that these are stories that still affect us all today. is a history that is very much part of what we experience today and the way our world is set up, the way our world is organized. And so I felt that this one really felt like it was something that was deeply ingrained in my own work, and so that's why I chose that one per se.
Yeah. And can you speak to the question of conjuring Octavia?
Oh, yeah. Well, I never, I wouldn't presume to say that we've sat down and had a chat or anything, but I do feel like, every time we kind of bring this work out there, and I just feel that, like I opened it saying, that this idea of kind of time travel somehow feels like it was not something invented in her mind. It really feels like something that she understood and experienced. And whether that, how you want to take that or how you want to understand that I feel that, she had the capability of visiting the past, so I believe she has the capability of visiting us here in the present and in the future sort of thing. So I feel that there is a connection in that respect, yeah, for sure.
Well, I think that's actually a perfect place to end. We will have a reception, so if you want to ask more
we can chat
questions
later.
and hang out with Alison, we'll have that. We'll also have, a display of some of her works that you can take a look at one-on-one. But I would just like to give a round of applause for Alison. Thank you so much. Thank you. And just to shout out the Library and Research Center, the Betty Boyd Dettre Library and Research Center. Again, I was so excited to work with Arion Press and my colleague Kelly Daly and Alison to bring this exhibition, to bring this talk. And we have an exhibition up right now of Women's Studio Workshop, where you can see other examples of artist books and art objects. So I really would encourage you to see that and learn more about what artists and poets and artisans are doing in the medium. So thank you so much.
And
yeah. Ooh, Ted, how do people get the book?
we just so happen to have a representative in our presence. Talk to Ted.
Yeah. Everyone, this is Ted. If you have questions about the book, find him at the reception.
And I just wanted to,
And the reception will be on the mezzanine.
and I just wanted to thank you so much for inviting me, and to thank the museum, and thank Ted and the press, and also to thank Kimberly Davis, who is here, who represents my work at LA Louver. So anything outside of this book, you can also speak to Kimberly. So. Thank you, and Scott too. Thank you so much.